Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group. 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's B-E-A-T. IRS, serving Alaskans, Americans since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. I have online with us Daniel Horowitz. Of course, he's a senior editor of the Conservative Review. Daniel has been on this program a number of times before, just recently guest hosted the Sean Hannity radio program. That must have been a real honor. I didn't get to hear that, but my understanding is he did very, very well on that. And, of course, is continuing to pump out excellent articles that are important to conservative Americans, those that are concerned for the future of the country. One of his recent articles that we're going to discuss today is entitled, "It's Time for Candidates to Discuss the Enemy Within." Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, Daniel.
Hey, it's great to be back with you, Joe. Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year's to you. So let's talk a little bit about what this enemy is. I guess there are not many candidates that are really addressing this issue, maybe to a certain extent Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. But you believe that the Muslim Brotherhood continues to pose a threat. Tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Sure. It's absolutely surreal that we have such a foundational, latent, and existential threat to our society, our government, Western civilization, for goodness sake. This is not really discussed as an issue. I mean, I'm trying to come up with a good analogy here, but imagine if you had picture, I don't know, say some white supremacist organization that had total control over the DHS Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Division and, was brought on by the media and the government panels, commissions, all sorts of, civil liberty type of work. They were dressed up as a civil rights organization. Who would tolerate it for a minute? But yet somehow both parties tolerate the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE, their offshoots, ISNA, all these organizations that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled and that they are unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation case. They're basically Hamas terror financing arm. So think about that. We have Hamas now at the highest levels of the Department of Homeland Security, and who's guarding the henhouse?
I couldn't believe, right after the San Bernardino shooting, in very short order, CARE was up on stage with a relative of the shooter. And just the whole appearance and the projection, what they said, of course, no real statement of sorrow. I mean, it kind of reflected who they are. Did that press conference concern you? I mean, I don't mean to go too far off on a tangent. It just prompted in mind an image of that press conference with CARE.
That's exactly it. That is what has gotten me on my latest kick. As you know, for over a year now, I've been focusing on what I call the first half of the equation, which is the mass Muslim immigration, bringing them into the country in the first place. But that's when I started focusing on the second half. What is radicalizing those already here? And that answered the question. Almost as telling as the San Bernardino attacks themselves were, it was the response. The fact that CARE got a hold of the family of the terrorists before the FBI did, boy, what do they know? And then this guy, see, to most Americans, they all have kind of funny-sounding names, and they all sound the same. But when you research these people, it's unreal. This Siddiqui guy was one of the guys at the press conference, one of the CARE reps in California. This guy, back in the day, used to translate the sermons for the blind sheik. He was one of his water carriers. The blind sheik was one of the masterminds of the 93 World Trade Center bombing.
Right.
We literally have terrorists that not only are not arrested, not only aren't at least deported from the country, but they are elevated to the status of civil rights leaders and actually craft the policies of the DHS Civil Rights Civil Liberties Division. And they're everywhere. So what I always tell people is that the Muslim Brotherhood in North America and their offshoots, they pose a more foundational threat to us than ISIS does. Because why do you think all these people are radicalized and want to fight for an ISIS and al-Shabaab or whatever other group they go over to fight for in the Middle East or perpetrate attacks here? It's because they are radicalized at home. And you always look at what's under the rock. Whenever we have one of these attacks, someone's arrested, you look at the imam, you look at the mosque he attended, and they're Muslim Brotherhood-affiliated mosques. And it was no different with the San Bernardino terrorists who attended the mosque there, a big Muslim Brotherhood affiliate. But what's worse, so that's the first half. where they radicalize the Muslims here. But the second half is their influence on our government. It's just, it is shocking. You could trace it back, and I have a lot of files on this I'm going to be writing about in the future. There's a friend of mine, Stephen Coughlin, a former intelligence officer. He has written a 700-page book. It is just a phenomenal book, Catastrophic Failure. I really recommend it. And if you can't read the whole book, Chapter 7 is really where he cites chapter and verse the people and the groups that influenced DHS. And this started in Bush's second term. This wasn't just the Obama administration. So what he did was he compared the 9/11 Commission report. And, it has 322 references to Islam, has a number of references to Muslims, jihad, Al-Qaeda. It calls out the problem by name. If you look at the subsequent documents, FBI counterterrorism document from 2008, National Intelligence Strategy from 2009, the Fort Hood document from 2010, there is not a single reference to any of that. And what you have a reference to is extremism and religion in the abstract. So everyone's wondering, man, why? And I mean, this is I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but it's out in the open.
What's your theory of why the Bush administration started to water down its approach to typifying the extremists, calling them what they are?
Well, that's the point. The Muslim Brotherhood has an amazing two-pronged plan where they deflect the attention from themselves and somehow get the government to actually agree with them. I'm going to read from you, because to me this really explains everything. Back in 2004, the FBI raided a suspected terrorist home, and they recovered what was, to me, what is really the Rosetta Stone of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's called the Explanatory Memorandum. Obviously, the original copy was in Arabic. It was translated into English. It was written in 1991 by Muslim Brotherhood leader Muhammad Akram. And what it says is the following. It says, understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. They literally talk about supplanting the society from within, using our Constitution against us, or using the liberal version of our Constitution and civil rights against us. And that's what they have done. So this is not speculation. Everyone now knows that the government has expunged all references to Islamic terror.
Let me get a little more specific with the question, though. You had the Bush administration, you had the 9/11 report that appropriately referred to jihadism, of course, Islam, Muslims, in its after-action report, whereas subsequently, 2004, maybe a little bit after, there was a distinct change where no longer were those things referred to, Islam, jihad, Muslims. Although this is their objective, how do they go about transforming the approach of the Bush administration in the second term?
Sure. It's all rooted in something called the CVE Agenda, Countering Violent Extremism. You go onto Twitter, you see a lot of these Muslim Brotherhood officials, they literally will have in their, the little Twitter bio there, they'll have on there hashtag CVE. If you remember, Obama, I believe in March, had a CVE conference, Countering Violent Extremism conference, and as you remember, he invited the violent extremists there,
right.
Big Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood dudes, people that if they're not terrorists themselves, they have terrorists on speed dial.
Sure.
And what they do is they literally dress up as the civil rights activists while being the terrorists themselves, and they say we need to go after root out violent extremism. And they basically get the government to start talking about violent extremism that is endemic of all faiths, it's endemic of all people, it's a problem across the board. And it would literally be like David Duke having an organization and starting a program for, combating racial divisions or something.
Is a component of this, though, money? I mean, there's been speculation that the Saudis behind the scenes are funding, orchestrating through monetary influence this stuff. Have you seen any evidence of that at all, especially with respect to the Bush administration?
This might be above my pay grade just simply because I'm not 100% sure about the connection with the Saudis and Wahhabism, their version, and then the Muslim Brotherhood organization. My understanding is that for the most part, they have been different networks, and especially now they are kind of on the outs because the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East, let's just remember, in North America, they dress up in suits. And in the Middle East, they're the guys dancing around with AK-47s and the ski masks. They're behind the Arab Spring and all these Islamic uprisings, and the Saudi kingdom is terrified that they're going to overthrow them. So now they're kind of on the outs. But it is a similar dynamic. There is money there.
Well, the dynamic is so weird, though, because, I mean, they're sitting there in many respects funding a lot of this stuff. And yet, yeah, I mean, the royal family is obviously a potential target. And some have suspected that it's kind of a side deal. Look, we'll turn a blind eye, continue some funding in exchange for us maintaining power. I mean, a lot of this, of course, isn't going to see the light of day until everything falls apart potentially. But I got to go to break. I want to talk more about this. After these messages, we have Daniel Horowitz on the show with us talking about the enemy within. Stay with us. The Joe Miller Show will be right back. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We're on the line with Daniel Horowitz. Daniel Horowitz has written an article called The Enemy Within, describing the Muslim Brotherhood within the United States as being hostile to our interests, being allowed to grow. Daniel, one of the things I found interesting, you're talking about kind of a split approach between Great Britain, United Kingdom, and the United States with respect to the Muslim Brotherhood. Apparently, UK Prime Minister David Cameron has now designated the Muslim Brotherhood a terror group, and in response, Obama has condemned the British move. What's going on there?
Yeah, this is really the catalyst why I wrote this article. I just jumped out of my seat. Earlier this year, I wrote an article, Are We Walking in the Footsteps of Europe? And now I see we're behind Europe. We're in worse shape than that. Even the Europeans, I mean, David Cameron is not, the Tories are to the left of Lenin. There's no difference between the two parties there anymore. Big PC guy. And they did an exhaustive report that, basically validates all the things American conservatives have been saying the past decade about the Muslim Brotherhood. And they're going to deny them visas. They're going to increase surveillance on them because we're either at war or not. And these people side with our enemies and had contact with our enemies. And are our enemies. They are Hamas. I mean, and these organizations fund groups like Hamas, and yet Obama criticized David Cameron. I mean, this is unreal. Where are the Republicans? Where are the Republican candidates? So as I note in the article, Ted Cruz does have a bill to designate the Muslim Brotherhood terror group. He needs to talk about it more. I mean, everyone needs to talk about that more. But again, Republicans are not going to grant it the light of day. They never want to talk about Muslim Brotherhood. The establishment, conservative foreign policy people, the neocons, you could Google some of these writers, some of their commentary, Weekly Standard, Charles Krauthammer people. Google Muslim Brotherhood. You'll never find it in their columns.
Where are the joint geostrategic interests that we have with the Muslim Brotherhood? I mean, that's got to be the motivation, right? They see there as being some sort of joint benefit to what they design for the Middle East and what we design for the Middle East. I don't see it at all. Or is it just this radical PCism that's taken over the influence within the government? There's not really, from the neocons' perspective, any type of joint benefit as far as geostrategic concerns.
I would say no, but there is an overlap in terms of the Arab Spring. I mean, the neocons were just like Obama, maybe from a little different angle. They were all into this spreading democracy in the Middle East. They were all into the Arab Spring. Guess who was behind it? The Muslim Brotherhood. So Obama saw this as a great fusion of his domestic goals and his foreign policy goals. The Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East was fomenting the Arab Spring. He was supporting it, coached on by the Muslim Brotherhood here. Now they are all, they're all deemed moderates by the Obama administration to combat the violent extremism. Now, as we know, the reality is they are the violent extremists. They don't always act violent in North America. They act subversively. They support the violent people overseas, their affiliates overseas. But the problem here is that they are given unfettered access. And you know what else is jarring? Everyone asks, where are the moderate Muslims? Why aren't they speaking out? Part of the answer is the Muslim Brotherhood. They control all the societal institutions they have in the mosques and everything, and they intimidate people. There's open cases where there was a famous one, Zudi, from somewhere in Arizona, Scottsdale. Believe it or not, this was a mosque that Jeff Flake, the Republican senator, just visited and pandered to them and complained about Donald Trump. This is a Muslim Brotherhood mosque, and he met with this radical imam that publicly basically called Zudi, this moderate Muslim who has a moderate Muslim patriotic group. He called him an apostate publicly, and that's a big deal in the Muslim community because that could bring on violence. I mean, these are the people that Republicans and Democrats alike are supporting. Look, just this past year, the House Committee on Homeland Security, chaired by Mike McCall of Texas, he had a bill titled Countering Violent Extremism to create a $15 million office, which would, guess what, be run by the Muslim Brotherhood to counter violent extremism. And you know who the extremists are. It's you and me. That's what they're targeting.
Just a couple more questions. We only have 3 minutes left in this segment, but I want to ask you, just kind of turning back to the Middle East and kind of the geostrategic overlap. What is the Muslim Brotherhood's role, if any, in Syria right now? Are they aligned with any of the groups, any of the rebel groups? Have they raised their ugly head there?
The Muslim Brotherhood is what we're supporting there. When you talk about the Syrian rebels, they are fomenting all of this. The Arab Spring was largely a Muslim Brotherhood insurrection. And this is kind of what we were talking about before, why they have butted heads with some of the Emirates and the Saudis. They are against this top-down leadership. They're almost like the Organizing for America, grassroots version of Islam. They're a grassroots organization. They thrive on chaos.
Is there a particular rebel group that they're overtly involved with there? Like we hear, of course, that we have ISIS-aligned rebel groups. We have al-Qaeda-aligned rebel groups. Is there a particular rebel group that they're involved with in Syria, or do you know?
See, they kind of operate on a different sphere, and this is why I refer to them as a more foundational threat than ISIS and al-Qaeda. Basically, picture them as the training camp. People matriculate through their ranks in terms of learning Sharia, supporting the concept of the caliphate. And then the Muslim Brotherhood is very bipartisan. They have a very broad appeal. In other words, they are officially Sunni, but they swing from both directions. So people going through their system, they could go on to join Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, anything. They're very much an equal opportunity society, and all aimed at one goal, which is Islamic supremacism. That broad goal. They'll take it in any shape or form. So they'll go with all these groups. So I don't think there's any one particular group, but it is all inspired by the uprisings, and it very much ties into Turkey and Erdogan, very much tied into the Muslim Brotherhood as well.
We just have a minute left, and I want you to speak briefly to the media and its silence in the United States, to the infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood, its activities within the U.S. government. What do you attribute that to? You wonder if there's some money there or if it's just pure PC and ignorance. But, yeah, I mean, they're not silent. They actually have them on. You'll often see a care representative on to talk about civil rights. Again, it's the fox guarding the hen house. It's a willful blinding of this country. And I think we have a great opportunity. The people get it after the San Bernardino terror attack. I think they're on defense. We just need a Republican candidate who is willing to make this an issue. By golly, if the Brits could do it, we could do it. So Trump, Cruz, you think both of those would take on the challenge? Anybody else that's in the running?
No, absolutely not. Unfortunately, none of them ever talk about it. Rubio makes himself out to be this big hawk national security guy. I have never heard him talk about the Muslim Brotherhood one time. And in fact, his entire Syria agenda and his whole democracy interventionist agenda is very much aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, I don't think he overtly supports them, but I'm just saying he has certainly not made it a priority to speak out against them.
Got to wrap it up. Thank you, Daniel Horowitz, for talking about the enemy within. That story's up right now at joemiller.us. Take a look at it. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.